from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast.
Coming up on AgDay, tracking land values and the outside influencers that are still unknown. We'll talk farm economy predictions with the chief prognosticator at USDA. In agribusiness, a May WASDE report preview.
Everyone's going to be watching to see how aggressive they are on the three big fronts for corn.
And taking City Hall on a long haul in North Dakota.
AgDay, brought to you by the Chevy Silverado, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickups on the road.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. 4 years of negative profitability on the farm, especially grain prices, is weighing down farmland values and farmers' sentiment on the economy. Results of a new survey from Purdue University show farmers are growing pessimistic about farmland values over the next 12 months and beyond. In February, 22% of producers expected farmland values to increase in the year ahead, but the percentage dipped to 18% on the April survey. And that pessimism remains when you look at farmland values 5 years out.
Going back to February, 53% of the people in the survey said they expected to see farmland prices higher 5 years ahead. On this most recent survey, that dipped to 46%. So we did lose some optimism with respect to farmland values into the future.
When it pertains to large farm investments, 68% feel it's not a good time to do so. There was little difference from the March survey to the April survey. One move that could help ease economic anxiety in farm country, closing trade negotiations like NAFTA. The administration's top trade negotiator saying there will be no NAFTA deal this week. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer says negotiators plan to meet again on Monday. It's his hope to finish negotiations in the next week or two. He says the window to finalize a new agreement closes in mid-May if they want the current Congress to approve the deal. One of the biggest oilseed processors in the world is confirming what many in the U.S. ag sector fear, that China has all but stopped buying U.S. beans. In a report on Bloomberg News, Bunge CEO says whatever beans that China is buying, they're not coming from the U.S. Instead, they're sourcing them from Brazil and Canada. Chief Executive Soren Schroeder telling Bloomberg as long as there's this big cloud of trade uncertainty, China's refusal to buy is likely to continue. Bunge is still meeting Chinese demand by filling shipments from outside of the U.S. Also in trade, a U.S. trade delegation left Tuesday for China, hoping to glean trade concessions from Beijing. President Trump tweeting Tuesday, quote, "Very much like North Korea, this should have been fixed years ago, not now." Lighthizer is not yet expecting a resolution. He says talks this week will not resolve trade issues, but are part of a process. Time?
Thanks, Clinton. Yeah, here with Dr. Robert Johansen, chief economist for USDA. As we look at the Trump administration heading to China, maybe possibly trying to work through some of the issues that we have right now, when you look at agriculture, which sector stands to lose the most when it comes to trade with China?
Well, you know, China, our number one trading partner for ag products. Of course, last year Canada took over, but for the most part, the last 5 years or so, China's been our number one destination for U.S. commodities. The number one commodity out of that bunch stands alone, and that's soybeans, and soybean products. We sell more soybeans, we sell 1 out of every 3 rows of our soybeans to China. And so if China does impose a 25% tariff and it goes into effect, that's going to really throw the market for a bit of a loop. Certainly we can find new markets, and there's a lot of different markets for soybeans, and we can move that around to different parts of the globe that are looking to provide animal feed. But I would say that that's going to take a little bit of time to figure out, just because it is such a large part of our export profile.
But you do think kind of the shuffling of the cards can happen?
Oh, for sure, yes. It will happen, no doubt. Brazil and Argentina will find more ways to sell more soybeans to China. We'll find ways to sort of backfill behind where Brazil and Argentina were selling their soybeans. And we'll probably find new markets too. I'm sure you're talking to other folks around the building that are talking about different places that we can find new export markets for soybeans.
Well, when we look short term, we've seen the volatility that trade with China has caused. Do you expect more volatility to come as we work through these issues with China?
Of course. You know, you look at the markets these days, you see a story about too much rain in the Midwest or something, and you'll see the markets respond. Same thing on trade. The market's really following a lot of this trade action very closely. You saw what happened with sorghum, for example. The anti-dumping duty of 179% really had an effect on the sorghum shipments that were going over to China. The market paid a lot of attention to that. I would expect that as negotiations continue with the Chinese, and the team that's going over there next week is likely to generate more news, and it's likely to show up in the markets. Again, as you mentioned, it's volatility. It goes up one day, down the next, and so it's hard to know where it's going to actually settle out in the long run. So we're hopeful that the negotiations will be successful, and certainly from an ag perspective, know how important trade is for our producers.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Johansson. All right, reporting from USDA here in Washington, D.C., I'm Tyne Morgan for AgDay.
Fresh word on Wednesday that the White House may hold another RFS meeting next week. E15 and RIN markets are expected to be part of the discussion. Now, also at EPA, the Advanced Biofuels Association has filed a lawsuit on EPA's RFS waiver activities. It wants to know whether the EPA violated the law in granting waivers to refineries. The group filing that petition in a U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. Scouts are in the home stretch of the 2018 Winter Wheat Tour, and through the second day, questions remain about how much grain will actually show up at harvest. We should have yield calculations from day 2 later this morning. Now, after the first day of scouting and 317 stops, teams calculating a yield of just over 38 bushels per acre from the stops in north central, and northwest Kansas. The Wheat Quality Council says that compares to 43 bushels per acre on that leg in 2017. Tour scouts indicating this year's yield number is likely high since wheat is about 3 weeks behind normal, it's short, and conditions are dry. We're joined now by Arlen Suderman, INTL FC Stone. Arlen, what's your take on what's going on with prices as the tour is happening?
Well, the initial strength comes from short covering. We particularly had a lot of short covering in Chicago. We're rationing demand with the higher prices. The question is whether it's justified. But then again, if you look at the history of the wheat market, the funds do have a history of periodically just taking the wheat market for a ride, even when the fundamentals don't justify maybe necessarily as we would think. A good example is in 2010 when we had drought in Russia. But we had plenty of wheat here in the United States, but we nearly doubled Chicago wheat futures in 5 weeks' time. So the funds have that history. They could continue to run with this. Right now they have the headlines to justify it. And I think it fits in within the broader concept that they just kind of like the ag sector right now, particularly the grain and oilseeds.
Yields are likely to continue falling. The Wheat Tour's final production estimate has been higher than USDA's May estimate in 12 out of the last 13 years. Let's get a look at some field conditions in the Midwest. Here's Mike Hoffman.
Good morning, Clinton. Farmers in northern Indiana finally getting some help in the weather department. Here we see Dave Davenport of Marshall County finally getting into the fields over the weekend. We're told they're making good progress. Temperatures have been in the 70s and even lower 80s for a couple of days. In all fairness, Dave's daughter works for us in the newsroom. And taking a look at the wind speed forecast from the south central plains to the eastern Great Lakes will be the windiest areas we start the day. Gets a lot windier by later today in Kansas, Oklahoma, and across the central Mississippi Valley. As we head into the day tomorrow, then we're going to see an area from the eastern Great Lakes down into Texas eventually develop, and then we'll see some windier areas get going in northern Montana once again. We'll have your forecast coming up in a few minutes. First, here are some hometown temps.
Save time each day and receive the latest market prices directly to your cell phone with market updates. It makes it effortless to stay aware of shifting market prices. Just text Markets 8 to 31313 to get started.
We'll talk demand and meeting USDA's expectations for the May report coming up in agribusiness. Plus, we visit a town in North Dakota that came up with a creative solution for a new town hall.
With a uniquely powerful formulation of proven ingredients, Resicor corn herbicide gives you extraordinary power.
Who wants dessert?
At least when it comes to weeds.
Grain markets cooling off in early trade on Wednesday. Let's see how things closed from our friends on the floor at the CME.
Soybeans were a little bit lower. It seems that export demand is really decreasing. Number one from China, concerns about implementing those tariffs really has people worried. Nothing has happened yet, but you know, who knows, anything can happen. And number two, it's Brazil. Brazil's got the crop is really, really big. Right now they're looking at a new record of 117 million metric tons versus last year's 114 million metric tons. That's a huge increase, and so lots of beans around, and that's really putting a little bit of pressure on our U.S. markets. Brazil's crop on the corn side has actually been a little bit weaker, and they've cut that crop size by 20%. That definitely is giving us a little bit of a lift. I'm Virginia McGathy.
Mike North, Commodity Risk Management Group, our guest here at the Agribusiness Desk today. Mike, as we get ready for another supply-demand report here in May, I think demand and watching to see if we can maintain some of this demand as we plant a new crop is something that we're concerned about.
Absolutely, and as we look at the last couple of years, acreage for corn has been somewhat static, and at the same time, demand has continued to grow. If you go back a few years, you see demand 1 billion bushels less than where it is today.
Amazing.
And so as we talk about this May WASDE, where the USDA will give us our first look at the 2018-2019 balance sheet, everyone's going to be watching to see how aggressive they are on the 3 big fronts for corn, right? What will we do for ethanol? I think it's conceivable that ethanol moves to about a 5.6 to 5.65 billion bushel number. Okay. What do we do to feed? And that's going to be a big conversation with, some of the struggles that we're seeing in wheat producing regions. Will that corn and feed competition, if you will, play out as wheat sees a little bit of a struggling crop?
Right.
What will they do? What will they do with feed? And let's remember that in the March 1 stocks number, we were a little bit behind pace on our feed usage, and that ultimately built up a bigger stockpile. So that could play out into that. And then lastly, exports. Exports obviously been strong as we've come through the last several months. And as we go forward, will they continue that pattern? Will any of these trade talks play into that number? And then, of course, that plays back against the shortened acreage number, 88 million, that we didn't expect to see in March either. And now, what will they use for yield?
Right.
It could end up that we have a 1.3 billion ending stocks number as we come through this report.
Interesting.
So that could really set that could set a really nice tone for our market. But here's the kicker, right? We add a couple million acres as we head into June's acreage report. Maybe it's not. We'll see. But if we do, that comes back to about another 450 million bushels to the bottom line. And then let's say we get a year like last year where we end up with another 5 bushels than we counted for. Now we've got another 800 million bushels out there. Now we're back above 2 billion bushels, and now we're talking about $3 corn again. Yeah. So the reality is there's room for a lot of movement in this market. So watch the WASDE, see what they have to say, but set your marketing plan to be able to manage both up and down in this market.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that, Mike. We'll be back with more Ag Day in just a minute.
Cut through the uncertainty in the markets. Give Mike a call at 608-764-0012.
Is now the best time to sell your old equipment? Pete's Pick of the Week keeps you up to date on current market prices, making it easy for you to know when to sell your equipment for the best possible price. Text Pete.
Welcome back to Ag Day. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman. Mike, as we look at the weather map, boy, you can see that system really working its way across the country.
Yeah, and that's where we've seen some of those severe showers and thunderstorms, even some tornadoes over the past couple of days. And there's lots of energy actually working its way eastward along this stationary front, each one of those waves increasing your chances for showers and thunderstorms. But the main storm is now over western portions of Kansas. And you know what? I just want to throw this out there. Oklahoma did not have a tornado until May this year. First time ever. So that's an amazingly late start for the severe weather season. Let's put the maps into motion. You can see that caboose of all of these showers or these waves moving along that front, moving into the Kansas City area by later on today. So it looks like showers and thunderstorms will develop along that cold front, but they'll be ongoing throughout the day close to the stationary front. And then you can see our model just showing a thin line of showers and thunderstorms. That can a lot of times be severe weather, and that's why we have to watch it. By tomorrow morning, then, you can see that's moving into parts of Indiana and the Boot Heel of Missouri, those areas, and it continues to move eastward from there. Most of the moisture will go with that system there. The next little cool front coming behind it won't have a whole lot. And we have one more system coming into the Pacific Northwest, eventually northwestern Montana, with some scattered showers as well. So precipitation estimate past 24 hours, the majority has been from central Texas, but especially on up into the eastern Missouri Valley, central Mississippi Valley. Adding in the next 36 hours, it all depends on where the heavier thunderstorms develop, but nonetheless, we're going to see some decent amounts along that front, as you can see, with some areas getting 3 or 4 inches of rain in those heavier thunderstorms. Snowfall estimate, it's all been in the Rockies and eastern Canada, and that's where it's going to continue to fall occasionally over the next 36 hours. Let's check temperatures. Pretty warm finally from Chicago southward. We're talking at least 70 degrees, lots of 80s showing up as well. Even some 70s in the northern plains behind the front. That kind of tells you that it's not real cold air coming in. 40s and 50s though tomorrow morning, northern plains, but still pretty muggy from Kentucky southward. And temperatures tomorrow afternoon to the south and east of the front, still in the 80s, but lots of 60s and 70s behind it. So we really have turned a corner here on spring. For our jet stream, you can see the storm system itself. That little ripple moves on east. Not a big shot of cold air behind it. A quick one for Sunday and Monday for the Great Lakes in the northeast. Then we kind of go zonal again with mostly mild temperatures across the country. That is a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. Fresno, California, first of all, good deal of sunshine and warm, high temperature of 84 degrees. Checking out Grand Island, Nebraska, mild with a thunderstorm likely, high of 73. And Lexington, Kentucky, partly sunny and very warm today, high around 86.
There's more meat heading to stores this year, so what does that mean for markets? We'll take a look coming up next and later when small town politics become a one-stop shop. On Drover's TV, red meat and poultry production increasing 2% during the first 3 months of this year. Market watchers say further increases are expected. Purdue economist Jim Mintert says pork production led the way with a 3.7% increase January through March. Beef was 2.6% higher and poultry rose 1.4%. Now, despite those rising supplies, fed and feeder prices of cattle, they rose in the first quarter, indicating strong demand. But drifting markets in April may be a sign that supplies are too heavy.
Cattle prices for the spring and summer will be a function of meat supplies, domestic demand, and export demand. And Mintert says we should expect overall production to surpass last year's total. He expects an increase in fed cattle marketings and an increase in slaughter weights. The combination could push beef production 6 to 8% higher over the next 6 months.
Henderson says while domestic demand has been excellent, large competing meat supplies will provide U.S. consumers with alternatives that will apply downward pressure on fed cattle markets in 2018. Now, the latest USDA projections call for a near 4.5% increase in Q2. If that's accurate, it means an additional 1 billion pounds of red meat and poultry will be on the market during spring months. When we come back, getting the biggest job in town doesn't always come with perks.
In the Country, sponsored by Kubota. Tractors, hay tools, utility vehicles, mowers, and more. Visit KubotaUSA.com today.
The phrase smaller government is used a lot by politicians and taxpayers. Shrinking the size of bureaucracy is easier said than done. However, one tiny North Dakota town has elected a mayor and city council who really are public servants. And they work in a town hall so small you could haul it to the next town meeting. Cliff Naylor from AgDay affiliate KFYR reports.
Plowing Main Street is part of the job description for the mayor of Fortuna, North Dakota. Gary Rust is also the auditor and the town's public works department.
Just keeps me out of trouble.
If the civic duty is too big for one person to handle, helping hands are provided by one of the 2 businesses in town.
You know, the sewer, water issues that come up, Gary and I get together, look at it, decide what's wrong and what's the best fix, and then we fix it and come over here and have a beer.
City Hall was once located in a back room adjacent to the town bar. Now, a former FEMA flood relief trailer is the seat of government.
It fits our needs here, you know, for a smaller town. We don't need a lot of room for meeting. If we do,
We can go across the street into the senior citizens.
30 people live in Fortuna, and the city limits cover 1 square mile. Gary was voted in as mayor by 5 or 6 votes. He plans to run again because who else is qualified to run the town all by themselves? I'm Cliff Naylor, reporting for AgDay.
Fortuna was founded in 1913. The town's name comes from the Roman goddess of fortune and was chosen by Sioux Line Railroad officials to enhance the expectations of pioneers about the prosperity settlers would find in the remote northwest corner of North Dakota. That's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. It's been part of your day with us. From all of us here at AgDay, have a great day.